Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Raising Corporate Ambition for Environmental Sustainability, Canada's Road to COP27 webinar series. Today's session, Feeding the Future, the Challenges and Opportunities of Canada's Agricultural Sector, will be the first session in a four-part series. My name is Daria Naglick, and I am the Senior Manager of Programs and Business Relations here at UN Global Compact Network Canada. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the land that we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaties signed with the multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Agriculture is the key to both poverty alleviation and economic development. It is a core element in building a sustainable future, ensuring food and nutrition security, as well as securing livelihoods at local, national, and international levels. The global agricultural system has had to evolve and to adapt to meet the increasing demands of a growing population and mitigate the growing impacts of changing environmental and climatic conditions. As companies continue to strengthen their commitments and actions towards building a sustainable world, it is imperative that we prioritize food security and sustainable agriculture, which increase economic stability for businesses and individuals alike. To accelerate our progress, we look to reinforce our efforts via three pillars of execution: adaptation, financing, and mitigation. We'll see these themes continue across the series as we make our way closer to COP27. Today, our panelists will share their experiences and expertise, highlighting how both businesses and government are working to further develop Canada's commitments to food and nutrition security, advance sustainable agricultural systems, and build on collective action and partnerships to meet the goals of the 2030 Agenda. I would now like to introduce our panelists for today. We have with us Carlos Romero, Sustainability Manager, Nutrien AG Solutions, Robin Anderson, President and CEO of Emerging AG Inc., and Susanna Ursoy, Deputy Director, Sustainable Development Goals Unit, Employment and Social Services Canada. Thank you all for being here with us today. Please, if you'd like to introduce yourselves now and offer a few words about the work that you do, we'd love to have you. Carlos, would you like to go first, please?
Sure. Thanks, Daria. My name is Carlos Romero. I'm the Sustainability Manager for Nutrien Ag Solutions here in Canada. That is the retail part of Nutrien Limited. My background is strongly based in academia. I have more than 9 years of experience doing soil organic carbon sequestration research and nitrogen management for cereal crops in the prairies and also in the US. Before joining Nutrien, I was working as a scientist at the University of Lethbridge and also at Agriculture and Food Canada. I'm bringing that knowledge to Nutrien Ag Solutions to capitalize sustainable solutions for our growers here in the prairies. And for this year, I'm overseeing the implementation of our carbon program, anywhere from the Peace River region in Alberta to Brandon in Manitoba. And that's my background. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this session today.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Robin, can we get an introduction from you, please?
Well, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here today and to be joining Carlos and Susanna on this panel. My name's Robin Anderson. I'm from a family farm in Manitoba from Treaty 1 lands. And we have the opportunity to work in agriculture our entire lives when you grow up on a farm. I set up a company called Emerging Ag. We work all around the globe on agricultural issues, particularly sustainable development related issues. And we have the opportunity to be advancing all sorts of priorities, including the future of women in agriculture, how we recruit youth to the agri-food sector, and the important issue of soil health, which we'll talk about a little bit more today. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Robin. And Susanna, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity really to speak today about the Government of Canada commitment to the United Nations 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development Unit. I myself joined the unit not long ago, about 6 months ago, here at ESDC, but have been in the sustainability space for more than 15 years right now within government, and actually outside, supporting innovative entrepreneurs and businesses. As it was mentioned in the introduction, I'm currently the Deputy Director for the SDG unit here, and really am leading the multidisciplinary team responsible for the implementation. Previously, I've worked with Parks Canada in sustainability, with the Standards Council of Canada in sustainability, and 26,000 series and standards, and 14,000 in environmental sustainability. The goal, though, is really to enable our environment and Canadians to move forward together in implementing the SDGs and the sustainability goals.
Thank you, everyone, for those introductions. And we're really, really happy to have you with us today on this panel. We'd like to open up today's discussion with a question for the audience. If everyone could take a quick moment to open up a new browser and join slido.com, where you can enter the code that is going to be shared on our screen as well as in our chat box. I'll give everyone a quick moment to do this. The number is 3795496. And you can just copy and paste this into slido.com and you'll be able to join for our first question. We will also be asking a few more questions via Slido throughout the session, so please keep this tab open throughout the session. So our first Slido question we'd like to ask: when you think about the impacts of climate change, how prevalent of an issue is food security to you? We'll just give everyone a few moments to answer, to enter their answers, and then we'll take a look. Okay, another 10 seconds for everyone to answer. It's really interesting watching this in real time. Okay, thank you everyone for participating and sharing your thoughts with us. It's really great to see, all of this come in, and, the score currently I think is 8.8. So that's pretty high on the priority list in terms of what everyone thinks when it comes to food security. So to begin our conversation, I'd like to start with you, Carlos. I'd like to talk a little bit about Nutrien's Sustainable Acres commitment. How are nature-based solutions helping the agricultural industry adapt to changing climatic conditions and to sustainably provide food security for a growing population?
Thank you, Jared. That's a great question. So I would like to start briefly mentioning, for those who are not familiar, that Nutrien Limited is the largest provider for crop and input services in the world. We're also the largest producers of potash in the world, roughly managing 20% of the global capacity of potash. We also manufacture a lot of nitrogen in different forms, and phosphate, with NPK being the most important macronutrients to secure crop yields and high quality food production, that is protein or oil, depending on the commodity. We operate not only in Canada, but also in the US and also Australia and Brazil. Also in some countries like Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay. So we're definitely a big ship that positioned us in a uniquely place to be a key driver for food production in a sustainable way. It obviously comes with a tremendous business opportunity, but also with a tremendous responsibility. So the company, from a corporate level, that is the macro level, launched Feeding the Future plan recently following the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. As part of that, we have a very ambitious commitment to reach by 2030, 75 million of sustainable and productive acres around the globe. And that includes the countries that I mentioned before. We are tackling the Sustainable Development Goals, but particularly around zero hunger. That translates into us on enable sustainable agriculture, having a carbon program, but also pushing digital technologies to maximize efficiency, for example, of nitrogen inputs or phosphorus inputs into the farm. Also push for emission reductions in our own manufacturing facilities and invest in technologies like low carbon ammonia. And even, for example, Inclusion Act through financial services. We obviously, for this mission, for these 75 million acres, we need and must capitalize in nature-based solutions. And here in Western Canada, and that's the region where I work and we are focused, Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, we're talking about no-till as a driver for carbon sequestration. And no-till in combination with increased crop yields, because no-till is part of the equation for carbon sequestration, but you need those crop residues inputs to be pumped constantly in the soil for the microbes to be able to sequester organic matter into mineral surfaces. And that's basically achieved through improved crop genetics or crop varieties in conjunction with either organic fertilizers or inorganic fertilizers in our case. Another option that we have for our farmers, speaking about nature-based solution, is basically try to push to increase legume presence in the rotation pulse crops. We know that legumes do not require nitrogen. In fact, they fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. So they provide an ecological service for the following cereal crop that doesn't have that capability to fix nitrogen. Another way to capitalize nature-based solutions is basically offering the portfolio that we have on biologicals. There are products designed to improve the availability for crops to access those nutrients our farmers are putting early into the season. And definitely farmers are operating already at a high efficiency level to be the drivers for increasing crop yields and take care of this rising global demand for foods and being more and more productive over the years with the same piece of land. We need to emphasize this, that we are becoming more efficient and getting more outputs from the same acres without having to plow natural pasture or even, for example, clearing forest in northern Alberta. So definitely nature-based solutions are part of our portfolio. As a company, we achieve it as we call it a whole acre solution. You need to account what's happening in the soil. We know that soils are diverse in Canada, particularly if you go, for example, from Lethbridge up to the Peace River region. A lot of gradient in organic matter and texture as a result of climate differences. So you need to start with the soil, but also take into consideration the interactions with the crop that you're growing in that year, with pressure, disease, insects, that all is going to vary depending on the weather conditions, and that holistic approach is coming from the CPA or a qualified agronomist working on a one-to-one basis with the farmer. So yeah, that's how we're approaching this from a corporate level, very macro ambitious goals, and then working with the farmer on a field-by-field basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos, for providing that really in-depth overview and really getting us started with the conversation. Thank you. Robin, I'd like to ask the next question or pose the next question to you. What are the challenges and or opportunities of adaptation for SMEs in the agricultural space when considering both changing environmental and climatic conditions?
Thanks so much. And I think Carlos gave a great example of a large-scale Canadian company that's got a real leadership role, but is working with SMEs, because every farm family is an SME and all the people in the agri-food value chain are SMEs. So we think about everybody from a restaurant that might be family-based, all through all the people who are trying to help us get our food. And I think there are a lot of great things, but let's focus particularly on that SME role as a farmer for a moment, because Carlos set that up so well in his conversation. And I think one of the interesting situations that we're in Canada is that, in fact, we started making several of those changes he's talking about literally 20 and 30 years ago. I remember as a small girl growing up, my grandfather thinking that black fallow soil was resting that soil. That was the best thing that you could do to protect it. And in reality, we came to learn that that was the wrong decision. It was leading to soil erosion. It was leading to water and moisture loss. And we moved to conservation tillage, as many, many farmers did in Canada in the 1990s. And now we're at a situation where that and adding things like pulses and legumes into our rotation are great examples of things that Canadian farmers started doing decades ago. And our challenge now is, when you talk about switching from traditional methods, is something that we've been doing that's actually delivering great results 20 or 30 years ago, still actually important. And I would say it is, because on old rankings that Canada used to do, and Suzanne, I hope someday you can convince the ag department to go back to doing the ecological rankings they used to do every 5 years. But we saw Canadian soils getting better and better and better as they moved into even 5 and 10 years ago. We've continued to improve that soil organic matter. And at the same time, we're seeing groups like our dairy sector making commitments to a net zero pathway on dairy. And we see the grasslands commitments that our beef producers are making. And that means actually protecting the way in which you're feeding those animals, and thinking all the way through, right from how you're feeding them and caring for them, all the way to things like using anaerobic digestion for alternate energy, where you put the manure into a digester that's using microbes to produce gas and energy that might power that farm, or might even help power the community around it. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And really, it's that issue of making farmers feel like they're part of the solution rather than telling them how to do it. Because we didn't have to tell them to make those changes in the 90s. They could see the benefits themselves. And climate is so real when you're on a farm. So there's a huge opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you, Robin, for highlighting those really, really great points for us. I just want to give Carlos an opportunity to also add to this conversation. Carlos, would you like to speak to what you think are some challenges and opportunities of adaptation in the agricultural space, just to build on what Robin has said?
Yeah, sure. And I completely agree with Robin that no-till is not something new here in the prairies. By speaking with farmers today, and even yesterday here at AgriMotion, you can backtrack it to the early 90s or even late 80s. Challenges are definitely, from my biggest, from my point of view, the biggest one is weather. Facing challenges due to climate change. We're going to keep seeing extreme weather patterns and localized weather patterns in the prairies. Last year, we know that we have a massive drought that impact crop yields, or even hail events that wiped an entire crop production in a given farm. So how we prepare growers to face these challenges is something that we must address for sure. And in my opinion, I'm a little bit biased because I have a soil science background, but everything starts from the soil and from the ground to keep that soil healthy and be able to retain nutrients and moisture. If you're facing a drought, or if your prices in commodities are higher, you need to, for example, take a soil test and capitalize on the nitrogen that you have already in the soil to maximize your fertilizer dollars and revenue at the farm level or field level. The other challenge, I guess, is farmers are only right now being paid by just yield, and that's the only source of revenue that they have. But in my perspective, my humble opinion, if we want to see, if society is demanding practice changes, they want to see more out of these farms, or driven by environmental goals or pressures from the market, society needs to start contributing to those changes somehow. Farming is a very high-risk activity. So that's why I think having a carbon program in the prairies and giving incentive, basically cash incentive and economic incentive to growers, is something that is very important to keep them adapting and evolving those practices, or even maintaining those practices in the ground. That extra cash flow definitely helps. And also partnering with downstream partners, in our case, food companies, that can bring value, and they have the same goals for zero emissions and science-based targets. In our case, it's Maple Leaf Food. So bring dollars outside just from a fertilizer or crop input service, also bringing money outside our boundaries and basically driven by food consumption and what's happening in the shelf. So that entire value chain, I think, is very important. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on and rationale around that question.
Thank you, Carlos, for sharing those additional thoughts. That's really great. We sort of wrapped around that conversation. Susanna, I'd like to take the conversation over to you. How does the SDG unit encourage participation and support from businesses in the shared responsibility to collectively address some of the challenges that we're facing? Can you share some of the challenges and opportunities presented when engaging with businesses in this work?
Absolutely, absolutely. This is an amazing discussion. I'm really, really honored to be here. Just would like to reiterate so that the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are really a shared responsibility. It's a collective tackle really to the world's most pressing challenges and problems. So of course, being part of this discussion is really important. And really, it's a whole of society, a whole of government approach. And so the SDG unit is being created to really enable organizations, departments, private businesses, SMEs to think globally but act locally. We are a new team. I just want to really sort of guide you a little bit in the history on how and when we created, but the unit was established actually on October 2019. And then we went on to have a national strategy and national agenda with a funding program, of course, attached to it, because what we wanted to do is really spread the awareness, create this enabling environment, and then support organizations, support SMEs, support private businesses, actually in implementing the SDGs and incorporating them. Just one on a side note, probably you know or not, Minister Gold, Karina Gold, the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, is actually the lead of the 2030 agenda in Canada. And the main goals are really to eliminate poverty, reconciliation with Indigenous people, advance gender equality, women and girls, and take action on climate change, clean energy, and agriculture, food, and sustainability. So these are part of our core mandate that it's important to understand. There's two components of this. One is that we work with other government departments. So if you think of us, we're almost like an umbrella overarching sort of like the framework and the guidelines with working with, of course, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, Environment Canada, Infrastructure Canada, Innovation, Science and Economic Development, just other government departments where we are also supporting them. So doing that on a government level, but then also we're building a whole of society approach, a whole of government approach to exactly being enable businesses and to fund them into their projects and to enable them to implement the goals. One of the big challenges, I would say, in increasing public awareness and establishing these partnerships, because we're a new unit, it's almost, I'm not ashamed to say, a lot of people don't know we exist, where we are, or how to find us, or how to seek, or how to apply for support and funding. And so that has been one of the main challenge. And so what we're also trying to do is really improve access to the knowledge, access to opportunities that there exist for businesses. And actually what we're trying to also do is identify innovative initiatives, such as what we have on the panel today, and really with Carlos, and really trying to support these initiatives going forward and leverage that support. So opportunities and challenges, I would say, but I'm not sure, Carlos, I hope you know where we are and where to find us. and for other businesses as well. And in fact, that's really one of the biggest challenges, is that there's a lot going on in the SDG space. But again, one of the I would say benefit of that is that in the end of the day, we need to report on these initiatives. We need to consolidate the data. We need to have very similar indicators. And in the end, we have to being able to enhance this on a global perspective, right? So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Susanna, for sharing those insights with us. And also thank you for highlighting the importance of the whole of business and whole of government approach to achieving the SDGs. I think that's really integral to this conversation, sort of the broader conversation we're having over the course of this webinar series. I'd like to ask the audience now to return to their Slido browser for our second question. And again, we'll post the Slido code in the chat function for everyone. And this is going to be a true or false question. So we'd like to ask, by managing soils for growing crops and raising livestock, farmers are unconsciously managing a soil carbon reservoir that is roughly equivalent to the total carbon that would be released after 100 years of fossil fuel burning at the current world rate. Okay, so we'll just give everybody about 20 seconds to respond. Glad to see that everybody thinks this is true. Oh, a couple of falsities coming in. 10 more seconds, everyone. Okay. Thanks everyone for your engagement. Yes, this statement is true, and it's a really remarkable fact to actually wrap your minds around. It really stresses the importance of sustainable agriculture. This was an incredible fact even for me to consider. So we're happy to share that with you, and really understand the impacts that we're discussing here, and that we're really trying to focus on. I'd like to jump in now to another question. Carlos, what would you say are the challenges and opportunities of transitioning growers away from their traditional farming practices to more sustainable practices?
Thank you, Jared. That's a great question again. So I would like to start saying that growers here in Western Canada have been taking care of their land for years, acknowledging that soils are not a non-renewable resource, and they're going to pass it to future generations in their families. So they need, and they know that they need to keep their soils and water outcomes in good shape for their daughters and sons to be able to farm good quality crop and a profitable acre in the following generations and seasons. If you think of traditional farming and picture what traditional farming will look like, I will say that will be a fellow that is plowing the land for weed control, or even burning the straw to manage crop residues in this part of the world where we're cooled and things don't decompose very fast. But that's not the case anymore. As Robin said before, no-till is the norm. And as I said before, you can track this back to the early 90s or late 80s. No-till has been the driver for carbon sequestration in the prairies over the years. So I would say that what you think is traditional farming is fairly sustainable already. From a nitrogen management point of view, which is the largest nutrient input that they need to apply for a thing like canola or cereal crop, inputs are not cheap, and they know that they need to manage it consciously, because they're not over applying honestly, because they know that that's going to be impacting their profitability and bottom line. So they're already doing a tremendous and good job to manage nitrogen, but also phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur accordingly to historical yields and their geography, and even relying on tools like soil tests, or even applying variable rate to the entire operation. If you start talking about the top tier growers and using enhanced efficiency fertilizers, which are fertilizers that have an ingredient into their chemical formulation that will help to reduce nitrous oxide emissions or ammonia volatilization. So I will say that traditional farming, if you come here to AgInMotion, you'll think that it's already very highly efficient and sustainable these days. Another way to think around this or reply to this question, this connects to something that Robin said, that soil health indicators have been improving in Western Canada over the years. Soil health, that is carbon concentration or organic matter concentration, soil structure, water retention. Over the years, due to the adoption of no-till and that trend of increasing crop yields and return of crop mass. At the same time, with some decline in Eastern Canada, when growers have to plow their lands because livestock production was not profitable anymore, and they start to grow cash crops. And that brings me to the point to emphasize the importance of considering livestock in the ecosystem and the impact that having a permanent pasture has in the land and the manure management. Right now in Western Canada, mixed operations are not common, so we have folks that are either heavily specialized in crop production, or fellows that are on the other end, just heavily capitalized in or producing livestock. So mixed operations are not that common, but for sure manure is something that, especially in southern Saskatchewan, or if you go to Manitoba, a lot of injection happening in a good way to recycle nutrients, and if you start thinking about a circular economy for recycling those nutrients and maximizing the outcomes and the inputs that you're having in your farm. But overall, I will say that traditional farming is very sustainable these days. So in our case, it's mostly help them get most out of their nitrogen or nutrient plan and help to document those practices. Thanks.
Thanks, Carlos, for outlining those points for us. Robin, I'd like to ask you as an SME, how are the challenges and opportunities of transitioning growers away from their traditional farming practices to more sustainable ones different? Are there any differences? Do they vary? Can you shed some light for us?
Well, absolutely. So I think that one of those points is that sort of spectrum of what is traditional, and that's what we're struggling with a little bit, because we've seen almost 90% of the prairies move to conservation tillage. And I do think it's an interesting east-west paradigm, as you said, Carlos, because those numbers are better in the West than they are in the East, and we potentially have as a country an opportunity to close some of that gap. But I think, some of the primary challenges when you're talking about an SME is that feeling of empowerment, right? Because they're entrepreneurs, they expect they've made a choice to have some control over the decisions they make, and they're accustomed to making decisions. The great benefit of that is they're not afraid of making decisions. And this is why we've seen actually a remarkable amount of Canadian agriculture be very early adopters. This definition of traditional is very tricky, as we've said. And is it somebody who is plowing? Is it this idea of monocropping? We don't really do that very much, particularly on the Canadian prairies. Everybody's got a crop rotation going. Some of these things have become a normalized part, and we've seen people adopt different crops where they might have grown rye and flax. Now they're growing canola and chickpeas. So these changes are helping. I do think that there are a couple of things. Costs of transition are particularly daunting if you're truly an SME, right? And an SME can actually be a fairly large-sized farmer today, but it's hard to buy an anaerobic digester, for instance, to do renewable energy, or you may be talking about moving to a lot of precision technology, because instead of talking traditional, maybe what we can all agree on is there's a next generation that is highly focused on precision agriculture techniques, that's using data systems to maximize every input that it's putting in. And we really need to reward them from that transition. And Carlos mentioned this quite well. Actually, he was hinting at something that I think is super important in the agri-food sector, which is we talked about carbon early on as something that farmers could gain as an extra revenue by selling their carbon credits to the aviation sector. And now here we are watching agriculture get hammered on its GHG outputs, and we've been selling our carbon credits to other sectors. So we might need to pause and talk not so much about offsetting for energy, we might need to talk about insetting for agriculture. And we've just seen some quite large scale companies make commitments to actually pay farmers for carbon sequestration as part of their class 3 emissions reductions. And I think if we can do that in agriculture, actually we'll find very quickly that agriculture can be net positive. But we have to actually clean up our own house first before we put any more carbon credits into other sectors. And we need to help SMEs to do that. Thanks. Daria, you might be on mute.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, I was on mute. Sorry about that. I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your insights with us. And, it's been absolutely great to sort of even hear how larger companies are handling some of these challenges. And of course, vice versa, what are the big transitioning points for the SME? So thank you for sharing that with us. I'd like to now head over to Susanna. Can you share with us, how has the SDG funding program helped to support projects that further Canada's progress towards SDG 2, which promotes a framework for zero hunger, achieving food security, and improved nutrition, as well as the promotion of sustainable agriculture?
So I love again this discussion. Thank you, Robin, and thank you, Carlos, for really highlighting those challenges and goals, because I've been in few, and the question that always comes as well is, this is great. You want me to do all this, but how? Like, how can I afford it? Like, how would I do this? Like, why? Okay, this is, I mean, who doesn't want to have a sustainable farm? But then we also know the difficulties, right? Like in agriculture and implementing that. And so for this reason, I'm happy to be here to say that there is funding. We, obviously it's not an unlimited wallet, but we have funding for those innovative projects and for those projects who are ready to implement the sustainable development goals. So just to give you an example, the SDG funding program provided really funding, even to raise awareness for the 2030 agenda, but to many agricultural projects in the food industry. So for example, we had committed $59.8 million for grants and contribution, and 4.6 million annually over 13 years. So from 2018 to 2019, and this will go for 2030 to 2031. There has been so much interest in the SDG funding program since its launch in 2018. We have funded 130 projects to date for a total of approximately $22 million. One of the biggest projects that we have funded is the Canadian Organic Growers. It's a kickstarting of food secure aquanies and promoting SDG across Canada and beyond. We have funded Food Secure Canada, which works on food policy and the SDG, mobilizing the expertise and reach of the food movement. We have funded Agriculture for Life, which addresses some of the SDG challenges in food extremes, and Unluwag Development Grouping Incorporated, which improves the sustainability of Indigenous owned ocean food businesses in Atlantic Canada. But because the SDGs, as I try to really highlight before, it's really a whole society approach. And so it's often when we fund projects or when we fund initiatives, they're not just clear cut and say like they're just addressing one goal, but it's really, there is an interconnectedness between the goals. In total, we've actually funded about 75 projects that align with food sustainability. All to say, these are some numbers and examples, but all to say that I am here today one of my goals is to raise awareness that the government of Canada is committed in supporting these initiatives. And we are really trying to build this environment and create and include everyone in it and leave no one behind, which is one of our motto. And often, I have to be honest, I am not seeing agriculture and the small businesses involved in it, partially because maybe we have failed to raise awareness, partially maybe because we haven't been as accessible. But I hope that after today's webinar and call, that we will have more involvement from SMEs and from businesses that are in the agriculture space and that are trying to implement the sustainability goals. So it really is a call for action on my part.
Thank you so much, Susanna. That's really great to hear. And thank you so much for highlighting all of those great projects and initiatives for us. It's really great to see how the funding is being used and how, we're seeing really tangible solutions come to life. So it's really wonderful. Thank you for highlighting those. I'd like to ask the audience now to make their way over to Slido for our final audience question of the day. And this question is going to be a word bubble. So everyone will be able to include any phrases or words that come to mind. And the question is, why do we need sustainable agriculture? So we'd really like to hear from you. Feel free to include anything that comes to mind, words or phrases. We'll give everybody about 20 seconds. Okay, we'll see some answers pop up. Okay, we see energy efficiency coming up, food security, of course, water quality. Ooh, soil conservation, carbon control, survival. 10 more seconds. Feed a growing population. Absolutely, no, it's really great to see everyone's thoughts and perspectives come through. Okay, and zero hunger for all. Perfect. Okay, thanks again for your participation and engagement. We really appreciate your thoughts and comments. We'll now jump over to our last set of questions. Carlos, I'd like to begin with you again. Can you tell us about Nutrien's carbon program? How have collaboration and incentive payments helped to accelerate the adoption of sustainable farming practices and ultimately the success of the carbon program?
Sure, thanks. So this initiative, the carbon program in Canada, started last year as part of our mission ambition around sustainable agriculture. We're in the second year of the pilot program. Last year, we enrolled roughly 45,000 acres in different geographies of the prairies in northern and southern Saskatchewan and Alberta, and also around Brandon in Manitoba. This year, we scaled the project. Now we're working with 71 farmers and enroll 220,000 acres across these three provinces. So definitely a jump from last year. We're stacking 2 government-approved protocols to maximize payments. So you got to be no-till, and we're relying on the information outlined by the Conservation Cropping Protocol in Alberta. And also from a nutrient management side, particularly nitrogen. Again, nitrogen is the largest input. We're relying on the nitrous oxide emission reduction protocol from Alberta. So at the end of the day, farmers get paid for being a no-till and for having a 4-hour nutrient stewardship plan for nitrogen that is applying the right rate, right source at the right time, and using the right placement. From an environmental point of view, nitrous oxide is a very potent greenhouse gas. Losses can be small, so they might not have a direct impact on yield or protein, but it for sure will have an impact on the environment, has a roughly 300 times the global warming potential of CO2. As a company, we're very large. We manufacture fertilizer, but we also sell fertilizer. From the manufacturing side, we have a very large scope 1 and scope 3 footprint from the manufacturing of potash and nitrogen. But for this carbon program, we're centered on scope 3 emissions, what's happening with the fertilizer that we sell to these farmers once it's applied to the field. We're chasing to reduce nitrous oxide emissions, as I said before, and at the same time boost carbon sequestration by being a no-till. We're using a custom-built mobile app, and all the information, either baseline or the project intervention, is being entered by qualified for our agronomists from Nutrien, capturing anything like target yield, target nitrogen rate, number of tillage operations, what type of land, and based on your geographical location and the type of management you're doing, you're going to be classified into different tiers, and the app is going to trigger a carbon credit, an estimated carbon credit for that field. Then, of course, we're going through a rigorous validation and verification process through the gold standard. So have to provide proof of evidence for each single claim that we're making. So at the end of the day, payments are adjusted based on the actual nitrogen that went into the ground, not the target nitrogen that was designed initially in the crop plan. what else? These are 1-year deal contracts. Since we're heavily based on the NERP protocol, everything is model based. We're not measuring carbon concentrations or stock changes in the soil. And that's why we are allowing to have a more dynamic type of contract with the growers, a 1-year deal. We know that carbon sequestration takes a lot of time. And those initiatives that are actually measuring carbon sequestration tend to be longer and long farmers for longer terms, like 5 to 10 years. For us right now, since we're selling nitrogen fertilizer, we're heavily focused on nitrogen management. This is a voluntary market, scope 3 intervention. We're insetting these credits. We're not selling it outside, so we're going to use it to claim it against our own internal greenhouse gas inventory. This is an investment for Nutrien. We're paying out of pocket. We're not selling the credits outside. So this is why it is very important to bring, as I say before, to the table, external partners that have the same vision around sustainability, sustainable development goals. And that's the case of our partnership with Maple Leaf Foods in Manitoba. We have 100,000 acres enrolled with them. And this is part of our internal program. And by having this type of value change interventions, we're able to bring external investments to the table and be able to maximize the outcomes and payments for the farmers. That's in a nutshell the carbon program this year. We're hopefully going to scale it in Canada for next year. We're also having different initiatives around traceability and measurement programs in the US and a little bit here in Canada, but that's in a nutshell the carbon program. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carlos. We received an audience question for you, so I just wanted to tie it in because it works with this topic. I just wanted to know if you could share with us what measurement tools do you use to determine the amount of GHG diverted using organic practices?
So we're not working with organic farmers. This is a NERP protocol. We're using inorganic sources of nitrogen. All the calculations are based on the equations provided by these two models, the conservation cropping protocol and the NERP, the nitrous oxide emission reduction protocol. Everything is coded into the app, and we have the field boundaries. So we incorporate also the geographical diversity. It's not going to be the same if you're applying nitrogen in Swift Current or in a dryland operation in Lethbridge, or if you're applying the same amount of nitrogen in Manitoba, which is obviously much wetter. We're not working with organic farmers. We're just working with fellows that are using the fertilizer that we sell. I hope that answered the question.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for shedding some light on such an incredible program, and then of course additionally answering those secondary questions. I'd like to ask Robin now, as your company has a strong focus on global agricultural policy issues, how can policy advocacy further support farmers in accelerating the adoption of sustainable agricultural practices as a solution to reducing the carbon footprint and adapting to future conditions?
Well, I think first I should be talking to Susanna. I love that list of programs. I love the way you said that, Susanna. And I do believe that one of the challenges is that indeed for much of the agriculture community, we wouldn't think to look there. And so it's great that you've invested in some of those agricultural programs. Hopefully you can do more of that with other groups that have other large operations across the agri-food sector. And the great thing is the agri-food sector is very well organized, particularly by commodity area, et cetera, to be able to implement. But I think some of the policy things we need next here in Canada are, first of all, broadband. Rural broadband is a problem, it's a problem, it's a problem. But we also know it's absolutely essential to achieving the kind of next generation agriculture that we need. So if we want precision agriculture, if we want the most sustainable approaches, those will be supported by cloud computing, good digital hookups, etc. People are already using GPS on their farms, but it is a problem. I even know people who during COVID were trying to deliver food from their farms and they didn't have enough bandwidth to be able to make the sales to get into the city. So this has to be treated as a core issue that I think the government has a role to play. Just like we need roads and railroads, we need broadband, and we need it in rural areas above all else. We need to think about the role of tax credits. right? That we used to get R&D tax credits to move to new varieties, and different things have been incented. Getting tax credits set up to incent some of these shifts into some of these newer technologies, whether that's the implementation of precision, whether it is the renewable energies, whether that might be a new kind of seeding equipment or other kinds of solutions. I think we need to think about that as a way to influence a lot of SMEs, where a single granting program may not be able to reach as many people. So they have to actually do it and deliver it. I do think the ability to get through the Ag Canada window is actually probably the thing that's most familiar and comfortable to people in the agriculture sector. So contemplating as you move across the government, how those things can be coordinated within the departments that people have as a normal portal of entry could be really influential, because there are business risk management programs and other things that you're doing in the government that if you folded some of the SDG amplification stuff in, could be super, super impactful. And then just a final passionate thought is to say, in the current situation, we are very lucky in Canada that wasn't 100% said food security was the issue of the day when thinking about the Canadian situation, because we actually have an important 2% of our population that's hungry, but it's not 30% and it's not 40%. And the world has been facing a real challenge on SDG 2. It is going backwards on our hunger numbers, and it's going back quickly, and we don't even know how bad this is going to look until we get the numbers next year. But I assure you, this year is horrible. And Canada had a bad crop year last year. And we were really lucky that Argentina and Australia happened to have good crop years this spring for us, harvest for them. But we need North America to deliver a really good crop this year in our wheat and oilseeds if we are going to make up the gap that conflict has caused. And taking our responsibility seriously about the role that that food plays as an exporter as well as an internal provider to peace and security around the world cannot be understated. So I think it's on us even more. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Robin, for your passion and for your insights. Susanna, I'd like to ask the last question of our session right now. It's going to go over to you. Canada continues to be a strong voice in raising awareness for the 2030 agenda. Can you speak to us a little bit about how the SDG unit has been supporting this effort internationally? Oh, you might be muted.
Yeah, trying to find my mute button. I'm actually going to start with something that Robin alluded to, which I think is really leading to me answering this question into that sort of the national component of the SDG, but also the international collaboration perspective, because we do depend on other countries as well. So it's really an national and an international effort. I'm not sure if some of you are aware or not, but we just had the high-level political forum on sustainable development, for short HLPF. It was held in UN in New York, really under the auspice of ECOSOC, and it was from July 5th to the 15th. And the theme of this year event was building back better from the coronavirus disease, while advancing and fully implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals. So you may also realize that these questions about food sustainability and agriculture came in repeatedly into the discussions of implementing and building back better the Sustainability Development Goals. ESDC had an event on education, basically, and creating tomorrow's sustainable resilient societies through early learning, education, and innovative education by leaving no one behind. But again, one of the topics that comes out more and more is that we would have, and there would have been a possibility to have actually an event or to open the discussion about food security, about sustainable agriculture, and about how the support of it and sort of that national and international impact. So there are a lot of opportunities as Robin referred to, is to not only look at our national collaboration, national agenda, and national involvement, but how we can take that further internationally, because ultimately we are working with other partners and other countries internationally to put this agenda. It is a global agenda, so there is a global indicator framework, and of course the Canadian indicator framework that we're using. There is, of course, many, as you know, international events that are currently being held on the UN on food security and agriculture. And I believe that some of them are happening sort of individually, with individual partners participating in it without building that whole of society collaborative effort and approach. Robin, I'm sorry, I'm going to quote you again, but you very really well summarized that. In some ways, when we're working into the policy coherence with government, and you identified some of the challenges, this is why the SDG unit really can help, because we really do work with government departments, and we can create that link. And is to say, if we want to push sustainability, sustainable agriculture, if we want to push food security, then these are the departments we need to talk to, and these are some of the, you know, the regulation, and since these are some of the sort of the directives, the regulatory requirements that we'll need to change or we need to push forward. So our, in some ways, strength, it's exactly that we're able to see a whole of government and identify those linkages, whereas going directly to one department might just kind of, you know, solve one of your problems. And I'm not saying we will solve all problems, but we are able to create those linkages with different departments, working with agriculture, working with Health Canada, working with Infrastructure Canada, working with Environment Canada. So we're able to pinpoint those linkages and really build that red line, is to say, in order for us to do this, here's all the things that we need to address and change and push forward to be able to have these results and records. So thank you for that, because I think it's really important to create those linkages.
Great points. And thank you so much, Susanna. And thank you for stressing the need to further collaborate nationally and internationally to drive collective action for the goals. You've stressed that several times throughout our conversation. And I think, you know, we as the UN Global Compact Network Canada, we're also stressing the importance of this cross-collaborative effort. And so thank you again for really highlighting that for us. So we've wrapped up today. Thank you for everyone for joining us today. Thank you also to our wonderful panelists for your time and your continued dedication to environmental sustainability and efforts to accelerate progress on the global goals. For more information around the topics of today's session, please visit our website, and you can always reach out to us at network@globalcompact.ca. I'd like to ask the panelists if you could please turn on your cameras, and just so that we could take a quick screenshot of today's panel for our social media. Since we can't be in person, I'll give us a 5-second countdown. 4, 3, 2, and 1. Perfect. I hope my team got that. And I'd also like to invite everyone to our next installment of the webinar series called Overcoming Barriers: How Protecting Nature Can Future-Proof Business and Mitigate Climate Change, where we'll bring together key stakeholders to discuss the challenges of mitigating biodiversity loss and the opportunities of nature-based solutions in the lead up to the UN Biodiversity Conference, also known as COP15, which will be held later on this year in Canada. The session will take place on Thursday, August 18th, 2022 at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We hope you'll be able to join us. Thank you again for everyone's time today, and stay safe, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.